Hello, and welcome to this special author interview for the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Spotlight. I'm Frasier Armitage, part-time robot, full-time nerd, and author of New Yesterday and Time's Ellipse. And joining me today is a fantastic author who's going to be part of the event in Shrewsbury on the 29th of September. It is Simon Kewin. Simon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Frasier. Nice to speak to you. Thank you very much. A
Yeah, it's
little
really
bit
nice.
rainy, but there we go.
Yeah, it's typical British weather, right? Hopefully, it won't be like this on the day. Um, it's it's really nice to meet you and speak to you. Just so that everybody knows, me and Simon are on a little bit of a delayed connection at the minute, so if there's crosstalk, then that's why. But what I thought we would do, Simon, is just let everybody who might be interested in the event get to know you a little bit and get to know your writing a little bit, and then hopefully what we'll be doing at the event. So tell us a little bit about your background as an author. What made you sort of love fantasy and sci-fi?
Um, I mean, I'm one of those people who grew up just loving the escape of science fiction and fantasy, and um, I from a very young age, like I imagine most people, I just escaped into other worlds and fantasy worlds and science fiction worlds, and I always wanted to create my own because why wouldn't you? Um, But like as for many people, I used to dabble in writing when I was like a teenager, but never took it very seriously. And then when I got to about 30, which I don't know, I know several writers who get to that age and then they start writing. I just I just started writing short stories and then just haven't stopped really, and I'm still going.
Excellent. Excellent. And as a genre, so like this the escapism that you mentioned about sci-fi and fantasy, what when it comes to escapism, do you find that you get that freedom more in those genres than you would do in others?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do read and to some extent write in other genres. I mean, I will read anything really. But yeah, it's those genres really that give you that sense of wonder and that sense of just glimpsing a whole other world. And I'm sure you can get it from historical fiction or whatever else there is out there, but just the ability to walk in somebody else's shoes in a different world has always, as for many people, it's always fascinated me.
Yeah, that's
So,
awesome.
and then the ability to create your own world and your own characters and your own places is just a delight, really. It's glorious.
Yeah. What is it that you sort of are drawn to when it comes to your creative process first, do you think? Is it the world? Is it the character? Where does it start for you?
It generally starts with the world or with an idea about a situation or how a world works or a particular set of events. And then characters are either they come along later or I create them as I write. But I rarely start with a character and think, right, what shall I do with you? I tend to start with a situation and then think, right, who are the protagonists in this situation and what problems are they going to face and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
cool.
it's a funny thing, character. You after a bit you start to think of them as people, but I mean they're not. They're just in your head, right? And they're you, but you think of them as separate people, and you hear them talking to you and doing things you don't expect, and that which is kind of weird, really. But I'm pretty sure it's normal.
Yeah,
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 but it sounds a bit mad when you say it, doesn't you? That you have voices in your head talking to you. But there we go.
yeah. I'm
Although,
afflicted with too many characters. That's the thing. It's
yes,
the.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it starts out where you think, "Oh, what am I going to do with you?" And then eventually you reach a point where it's like, "Oh no, what are you going to do with me?" That's the with characters,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, when I write a novel, I always know I know the sort of kickoff point, and I always have an end point in mind, so I know where the characters have to get to, if indeed they do get there. But what happens in the middle, I often have no idea, and the characters often just make that bit up for themselves because that takes the work off from me. But sometimes they just do stupid things or go off and do things I don't expect, and then I think, well, hang on, I've got to get you over here, and what are you doing over there? It's a weird process, but
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah. I've got a toddler, 3-year-old, and wrangling him sometimes is feels like a piece of cake compared to sort of, you know, trying to get him out of the door is easy compared to trying to get my characters to do what I want them to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But don't ever have toddler characters would be my advice, because
Yeah.
it would be doubly awkward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, yeah. Yeah.
So you don't just write one of these. You're not just like a fantasy writer or a sci-fi writer. You are both. And I wanted to talk to you about your experience in writing both genres. How does it compare? What's the differences? So first of all, let's talk about similarities. What similarities are there between writing sci-fi and writing fantasy in your experience?
I mean, in both genres, as I suppose in any writing, there's a lot of world building that you have to do. Because if you're writing sort of realist fiction, then the world is kind of there for you. You just look around you and stick some characters into it. But with both science fiction and fantasy, you're having to create worlds effectively, whether they're planets or fantasy worlds. So there's a lot of crossover there, I think, between them in terms of the imaginative effort / fun involved. And I find when I'm writing science fiction, I sort of think, oh, having to follow the strictures of science is such a pain. I'm going to write fantasy next. And then when I switch to fantasy, I think, well, this is great, but I quite like to write some science fiction where that you know what's going on with the science, and it has to follow some laws, you know, that you don't have to just invent. So I think there's a creative tension between the two for me, and I do flick between the two quite happily. And very often I'm writing science fiction and fantasy at the same time, as in two different stories. I mean, you know, that's I don't really see a difference between them, and often, although there is pure science fiction and pure fantasy, of course, a lot of stories will cross over and be science fantasy or something, and I think that's all to the good.
Yeah, like a meld of the two. When
Yeah.
it comes to the differences, then, do you think that sort of the limits of the world and the potential within that world, is that the biggest difference? Sort of, you know, science fiction being rooted in things that are feasible and fantasy being things that are completely beyond the limits that science can impose. Do you think that's the biggest difference?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I mean, even with fantasy, you have to create rules, don't you? You have to create a magic system, or you have to create political systems, or you have to create something that you have to create a framework for the characters to exist within. But that framework you have much more freedom to create what you want in fantasy. So I suppose it does give you a lot more freedom. And if you need to do something impossible, then you can just say, well, that's just magic, isn't it? That's just the way that works. You know, and you obviously have to consider the reader. You can't just do any old thing. You have to kind of create a believable magic system or whatever it may be. But it does feel a lot freer fantasy than science fiction to me.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a cool way of putting it. Because obviously the spotlight event is on both its fantasy and sci-fi, and as a genre, they kind of like get put in together of SFF, don't they? To you
They
know,
do.
yeah. Do you think that that's why? Because the line between them can at times sort of not really sort of be a very solid one. Do you think?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I find all these genre boundaries kind of unsatisfactory. I mean, I don't really think there's a difference between science fiction and literature or romance, or I think they're all of those things are in all of those books. Was it Gaiman said that every novel is a fantasy, right? Because it's all just made up people in a made up world. So it's all a matter of degree. It's not a hard and fast rule, but obviously it's convenient to have labels. So science fiction and fantasy, which in many ways are very different genres, we do tend to group them together. I think because people who read one tend to read the other, I assume, like me.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm thinking about sort of in just modern sort of media. There's been so much. It was kind of like a boom time for SFF. You know, I think particularly this last decade, we've seen some absolutely amazing sort of coming into the mainstream sci-fi and fantasy in ways that have it maybe it has done before, but it feels like this is like a particular wave of popularity in the genre now. And speculative fiction is kind of having its moment, isn't it? And do you think that this is gonna last forever? And if so, do you think that people are finally caught up to what's so special about sci-fi and fantasy?
I mean, it's a really good question. I hope I hope yes, but I mean, I guess I've always been so subsumed into the fantasy and science fiction culture that it's always just been there for me. And you're right. There's suddenly so much more of it available, and Game of Thrones is on everywhere, and suddenly everyone's a Game of Thrones fan, and, which is great. You know, I don't have a problem with that. Um, and it doesn't seem to be going away. So yeah, I imagine that it's just part of the mainstream now. It's just another type of fiction, which is good. I mean, you know, I think there's room for all sorts in the world. So I hope so.
That's awesome. Do you think that, like, when you started out writing your sci-fi and fantasy, if you'd have known sort of like that you were going to become an author of this genre that was going to become so mainstream, um, what would you have felt like? Would you have felt intimidated by that? Do you think, or do you think, oh no, actually, this is a really good thing? Or
I mean, I probably I should have thought to myself, oh, that's a really good opportunity. But to be honest, I didn't think either of those things. I didn't think this is a good career move or this is a bad thing to do. I just write what I want to write, really, and sometimes that kind of coincides with what the world is interested in, and sometimes it doesn't. But I've never attempted to chase trends or markets or fashions at all. I don't see, you know, I don't have a problem with writers who do that, but that doesn't seem very much fun to me. So I've always just written the next idea that's come into my head and just write that and then see what happens, you know.
I think that's one of the things I'm so looking forward to about this spotlight event is that it's going to be full of people who are not sort of chasing trends, but who are just writing for the pure love of sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah.
And it's that the passion that you bring into it, I think, is part of the fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is great. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you know, when I went to university many years ago, I wasted far too much time playing Dungeons and Dragons and just finding like-minded people who spent whole nights just pretending to be dwarves and elves and all the rest of it. And you know, to some people that sounds crazy and you know incomprehensible, but to a lot of people and to a growing number of people, they just get that. They get that imagination and that sense of wonder and escape. And yeah, it's been fascinating also how the kind of geek culture that's grown up and the sort of alternative culture surrounding science fiction and fantasy, and the fact that it's been so, you know, it's so accepting of people from all sexualities and everything is it's been fantastic, really, because that wasn't really the case when I started out. It tended to be sort of fairly cliched and niche field, but these days it seems so inclusive and varied that it's wonderful, really. I'm it's delightful to see.
Yeah, that's great. And nothing beats the feeling of rolling a 20, does it? It's like it's a special moment.
Yeah. Well, in one of the novels I wrote just recently in my Office of the Witchfinder General series, there's a point where the main character has to. I mean, he's facing a sort of demonic threat in the real world, but he has a device which is a 20-sided shape. It's basically a D20, but I don't call it that. And he has to throw it in a certain way and just get it to a certain spot. He's basically doing a saving throw on a D20 to save the world. And you know, little things, little nods to gaming culture like that are always fun to write.
Yeah, definitely. The so we talked about your experience as a writer and your love of sci-fi and fantasy, but you just brought us on really nicely onto the sci-fi and fantasy that you've written and the worlds that you've created, because you've got this um, Office of the Witchfinder General series, and it's
Yeah.
through Elsewhere Press, isn't it? That it's coming out. You have a what's been your experience with writing those books and with traditional publishing, and have you yeah, tell us a little bit about what that series is about and your experience in writing it.
Okay, well, I started those books just after I'd finished the Triple Stars books, which are sort of, far galaxy spanning science fiction. And like I was saying before, after that, I wanted to stop having to think about entire galaxies and billions of years. So I wrote, so the Witchfinder books are written in the current day in the United Kingdom. They're sort of, I guess you'd say, urban fantasy, maybe, or I don't really know what that means, but a lot of them are based in Cardiff, which is kind of my nearest city, although they occasionally stretch into Herefordshire, and don't think I've been to Shropshire yet, but perhaps I should. So that the basic idea of them is that there's a shadowy wing of the UK government called the Office of the Witchfinder General, which has been protecting the public against arcane threats since the 17th century, with various degrees of success. And my main character is he starts out as a fairly low level officer in the Welsh office of the Witchfinder General, and it's just about his adventures really and the threats he faces. And I love drawing places from the real world and people from the real world and kind of giving them a fantasy twist. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. So yeah, you totally bring it into Shropshire, bring it to Shrewsbury. You could set something a future book at the event that we're going to be
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
attending.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's an idea. That is a good idea. I've just finished the fourth one, and that's gone off to Elsewhen for their hopefully approval, but we'll see. But so yeah, I'm writing at least one more. I've got at least one more planned, and I don't really have any plans for it. So yeah,
There
that
you go. The
perhaps I
birth of
should.
your fifth Witchfinder book just happened. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um. So the with looking at sort of like the British government and doing it like that, has it got sort of like the spy element as well as the fantasy element?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. It's there's been some very strange kind of parallels to the real world at times. Like in one of the books, I think the second book. Gosh, I'm losing track already. Second or third books before, and I really don't want to sort of drag politics or anything into this, but at one point, my main characters end up having a party in the garden of Downing Street, and this was before I wrote it before the party in the garden of Downing Street. So it was a bit because the office has a secret office inside Downing Street in number 13, as it happens. Um, so that yeah, there is some sort of spy-like shenanigans and secret service stuff going on, um, but it's mainly just a way of taking the slightly boring and mundane real world and giving it a fantasy twist and having all these threats creeping up through the grids and out of the woodwork. So
Yeah.
that,
And
that,
has it been? Sorry, go on, Simon. That's our crosstalk happening. As you can see.
sorry, no, go on, you go. I'd stopped.
I was just going to ask about your, sort of like making the real world more fun. Is that, do you feel as though, sort of what you've been able to do with the Witchfinder series, that it's also part of the fun is inventing sort of things that could be happening in the background that nobody really knows about, and then playing around with how far you can stretch it into the real world. Is that part of the fun?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I draw on a lot of actual events in the world that take place, or historical events, and then just think, well, maybe this is the explanation for it. It's not what we're told. So it's kind of fun inventing crazy conspiracy theories and and fantasy explanations for what's going on. I'm conscious there's a danger in that as well, because some people seem to do that and then think it's real, which is always troubling. So I'm very, very clear that this is fiction. But it's we're going to be talking about world building in Shrewsbury, and part of the advantage of books like this is that you don't need to do too much world building, really. You don't need to create whole worlds, because I live in that world. And I walk around Cardiff, and I was in Cardiff on Saturday, and I saw there's a statue in Cardiff. I don't know if you know Cardiff. Statue of Nye Bevan at the end of the Pedestrian Shopping Centre. And in the book I've just written, there's a bit where the main character has to go underground. I won't go into why. And I thought, Nye Bevan's the statue. He's just pointing down at the ground as if to say, you need to look underground. So I love just bringing little details from the real world like that into what's going on in the fantasy world. So,
oh, that's fantastic. I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
One of the things that you have created, though, is an entire galaxy, and they are entire worlds, for the Triple Stars trilogy. Was that a fun thing to hold in your imagination?
It really was. I did something I would not recommend to another writer, which is to write them backwards.
Wow.
I don't mean sentence by sentence. I mean, I wrote the third book first, thinking it was a single book on its own. It was a standalone book. I didn't think it was a trilogy. And so then I finished the third book, Godstar. And then I thought, well, hang on, there's a whole story about how we got here. So I need to write, and decided to write two more. So Dead Star, and then Red Star, and then Godstar. So that it did present certain difficulties, but also it meant that I had to several times I had to go and amend the third book, which I'd already written, to kind of change what I'd written in the lead up event. So it did get quite complicated, and there were spreadsheets, and there was a lot of searching about where was he at this point, and all the rest of it. But it was, I would definitely recommend writing them in proper order to anyone who's thinking of writing a trilogy, because it makes it much easier. But it was fun in the end. It was good.
What I really like is how you're kind of like ending at the beginning when you're writing them, sort of like backwards. You've got to figure out ultimately, like, okay, where do I start this story, and that's the last thing that you're writing, and you write from that point on. I really like that idea, actually. But I know you say not to do it, but I'm really tempted to try it now.
I mean, it sounds mad, and part of the problem is, of course, you write a book and then you can't publish it because you've got to go and write two more before you get to it. So that's a bit annoying, but it was quite nice in the end. And I often, when I'm writing a novel, will write the last chapter, I suppose, so I know where I'm going to get to. And it's kind of the equivalent of that, I guess, just with an entire novel.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned earlier that you're on a panel about world building, and we're going to be doing that together, which is really, really nice. I'm looking forward to that. Tell us a little bit about sort of your experience with panels and your experience with cons before. Is this something that you're like a dab hand at with regard to sort of like being featured on panels and things?
No, I'd say I'm sort of level 2. I've done 3 or 4 and gained a few experience points, but I'm not level 10 or anything. I've been to I think 4 conferences before and done a reading or been on a panel a couple of times, and it's always fun. I guess all audiences are decent, nice, kind people, but I do find science fiction and fantasy audiences generally very welcoming and kind. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Maybe I'll get the experience points to get up to level 3 after.
I hope so. I hope you level up. That would be great. Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody is tuning into this, and if anybody enjoys the sound of the Witchfinder series and the Triple Stars series, and wants to find out more about how those worlds were built and how they were created, yeah, pop on down to the Nerdy Cafe in Shrewsbury on the 29th of September, and you'll be able to hear Simon talking about it. And it's just lovely to interact, isn't it, at conventions with other like-minded enthusiasts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's going to get dressed up as warriors or wizards, but I wasn't planning on it. But have you any plans?
Well, now that you mention it, I'm really tempted to, but I hadn't thought
Oh,
that far ahead. But oh, I would love to see you dressed up as a wizard, Simon. That would be great.
yeah, I can see that. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
I'm quite tall already, so a large pointy hat might make it awkward. So. Yeah.
Well, that's just, yeah, you could have the pointy hat and just, have somebody be your like hat bringer. That would be you could, yeah, that's a good bit of befriending, that,
That's very tempting.
Either that, or you could dress up as one of your characters from your Witchfinder books, and then we would never know that you're actually secretly there to prevent some kind of, mysterious thing from happening.
Weirdly, just as a joke, I did put myself in one of the books, so there is actually me as a character in the third book, I think. So I am actually in there already as a character, just as a joke, really.
That would be so meta, because then you would be interacting with yourself as a character. If you dressed up as a different character in your book, that would be, yeah,
that would,
that's mind bending. That's Well, it's been absolutely lovely to chat with you, Simon, and it's great to meet you. And it's going to be great to see you in person at the Nerdy Cafe in Shrewsbury. Check it out online. You can pre-book tickets, and yeah, if you're interested in finding out more from Simon, then pop along, and yeah, it would be great to see you. But thank you, Simon, for joining me today. And just for people who have enjoyed our chat and just want to sort of find out more about your work or interact with you, where can they find you online?
I guess my website is the main place, so that's just my name, simonkewin.co.uk, and yeah, all my books and stuff are there. Or Twitter or X, I guess, at Simon Kewin. Or just come along to Shrewsbury and say hi.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Come along to Shrewsbury and say hi. Excellent. Thank you, Simon. All the best with writing your fourth book and sending it off, and getting that sorted in the Witchfinder series. And in the meantime, yeah, have fun until we see each other again in Shrewsbury.
Great. Look forward to it. Thank you very much.